Hi, I'm Doyle.
And I'm Jordan, and I got something to say about the situation with the University of California. They have voted to suspend requirement for the ACT or the SAT until 2024. And there's several parts of this that I want to kind of dig into. As I read about this, and when I first saw the story that they were considering it, I thought, well, that's a little strange. Why would they consider that? And then it occurred to me, oh, students probably can't take the tests right now. They need that for applying immediately, basically for the fall. And some students would want to take it now, potentially even for next year. So I can understand wanting to delay that requirement or absolve them of that requirement for the short term because of the real special circumstances we find ourselves in. That makes a lot of sense to me. But as they actually approved that change, and I saw that it was a delay to 2024 to potentially pick that back up. It made me scratch my head a little bit, but that's a long time out from right now, and presumably things will get back running pretty quickly in the next few months, and taking those tests won't be a problem anymore, right? And at that point, then yeah, let's pick back up this requirement. And so I was wondering why that was, and of course this all this revolves around maybe a predecessor question of what is the utility of ACT, SAT sort of tests, of those tests specifically, and the utility of using that to determine applicants' status one, and then two, just ability or relevance to certain programs or certain universities or colleges for that matter. And so really the reading into this, like where this comes from and kind of the thought behind all of it, led me down a little bit of a rabbit hole that I want to unpack here with you tonight, Doyle, if you're up for it.
Sure,
um,
sure.
so there's two parts to this that we probably need to separate, or three parts. The first part being what I'd mentioned before, the relevance of standardized testing, maybe particularly ACT, SAT, but just maybe broadly, let's just say standardized testing and the use of that with regards to an admissions process at a college or university. That's one topic. Another topic is the lifting of this requirement for the certain circumstances we find ourselves in now with COVID-19 and just all of the different gubernatorial decrees around the country, and how that affects things like taking and administering
Sure.
the ACT and SAT. And then the third is the movement of and it's apparently a movement that I was not aware of until looking into this, of a certain groups of people who are trying to have standardized tests removed from admissions processes for various reasons, right? And I kind of want to go through maybe some of that and just maybe speak a
Mhm.
little more detail what I know, and I want to first make a disclaimer here that I don't know everything, and I've
Mhm.
done limited research to this, but I've read several articles, and I've tried to take in from a few different viewpoints. As we've said before, you try to balance that out as much as you can. And my thoughts on it I don't think aren't too slanted. I just have some pretty strong ones because I've had this real kind of paradigm shift in my life in the past several years, where I had previously been a very strong proponent of academia, because my experience with it was extremely limited and in extremely technical fields. But academia as a whole, that's such a minority of academia as a whole, that as I've broadened my view on that to see like all of that as an institution, I kind of have a different perspective on it, and I think a lot of this is all intertwined. So that's all big intro, and so like I said, we could take all three of those points if you want, but maybe let's start with the idea of using the ACT, SAT standardized testing as a metric or as a tool for determining the viability of potential candidates at a college or university. So argument posit the argument that this is probably why universities and colleges use them, is that they give a way to compare students that are coming from vastly different educational backgrounds, not just in what they learned, but also in the school systems that they were in and what those school systems taught, and how deep they went into the things that they taught. It's a way to abstract some of that away to try to see what is this student's, propensity toward learning or current level of learning,
and likelihood of success too, right? I mean, that's sort of an indicator
right.
that.
Right. Yeah, that's what I mean by propensity to learning, meaning that they can go to these classes, they can absorb, and they have some faculty of critical thinking, at least to some degree, such that they can apply that to any field, right? Because all students, no matter what major you're going into, or at a university or college, are usually subjected to this requirement of a standardized test. So the theory is that no matter what field they're going into, it gives some level of base ability, base critical thinking, etc., that you can apply to any field and potentially be successful.
Yeah, I think a foundational block to that to the stipulation that the ACT and SAT tests serve as indicators. You have to look at some of the foundational blocks, and that is, what is the grading or the scoring system that these students, the various students, all operate under. It's not the same, right? It's not the same from school to school. You might, one school, and this is something that I never quite understood. 4.0 is straight A's, perfect. How can people graduate with a 4.8? I mean, I understand the rationale. They take advanced courses, but that sort of changes the metric. Sort of changes. It's like saying a ruler is no longer 12 inches. It's 16 inches because we need it to be longer. A foot needs to be longer in some instances.
Well, that would be okay if that meant that. What that means is some rulers are 16 inches, some rulers are 12 inches.
Right, and so that's the thing. There's no consistency, and there's no. It's hard to say. Well, one person could have graduated high school with a 3.5 GPA, grade point average, and another student in a different school graduate with a 4.0, but the person with the 3.5 could have accomplished a lot more in school based on the expectations. And I mean, you probably even would say that, or would agree that, and even in this within the same school, the tracks that students take, right? Some students take, the STEM track, the science and technology,
sure,
and math and what all, and some don't. They take the minimum that's required in those, and take, the more social. I mean, well,
vocational.
I can't think. Well, not vocational. I'm just thinking liberal arts is what I was looking for. The more liberal arts,
sure.
Course structure, and there's less. They're different, but they get measured in the same way, and so the standardized test. I think an objective was to what you say, extrapolate from all of that, and have a measuring stick that at least attempts to be the same everywhere.
Yeah,
the problem is it's not even that, right? Because then what I was talking about doesn't even take into account, social influences. We know that, or believe that the standardized tests tend to be biased against minorities, or at least that's the word of the experts.
And I think definitely let's save that part of it to one of the parts where we're talking about the arguments, because that's one of the arguments, obviously, and I think that a discussion around that's warranted. But you reminded me of a fourth point that I kind of wanted to talk about, which maybe we can tack on right after this section before we go to the two about actually extending those or dropping those requirements, and that is manipulation.
Right.
And manipulation in a lot of different ways, and we can talk through all that. But going back to your point about kind of trying to equalize the ruler with regards to students in different schools, different states, vastly different systems, different cultures, even, right? And how it even does that within the same schools. and you said within different tracks. I would even argue as minutely as within the same tracks, because in my personal experience, there was some discrimination of applied things like extra credit and whatnot based on students schmoozing with teachers, etc. And
Sure.
and it's a political game even at that level. And so, but my point being is that we need that. I believe this is me putting my opinion out there, but I think that it's well reasoned and well founded that we desperately need some sort of way to compare, John Smith from, I'm trying to think about like Mobile, Alabama, to Jane Jeffries from Vancouver, Washington. Right, those two school systems are going to be extremely different. And let's take the case where John Smith down in if that's what his name was, I don't even remember if that's what I said. Say John Smith down in Mobile is by any metric that we can really assess much brighter than the girl from Vancouver, Washington. So it likely, if you were just to ask them about the things that they learned in school, the girl's going to have learned more just by the mere fact of how the school systems in those areas probably work. And that's a die roll. I don't know that. That's based on other things that I know about those areas, right? And it's no judgment on it. It's just the facts. I mean, I think you can assess that. One way or the other, it's going to be different, is my point, right? And so you could have somebody really bright from a school system that they don't learn as much, and somebody not very bright from a school system that, just really pounds stuff into kids' heads where they come out knowing some things. And that's not going to be a good metric, right? You need some metric to say, forget about what things you learned. I need to know if you learned how to learn. I need to know if you learned how to think, that sort of a thing. And so whether that's the ACT or SAT, I don't know that those are necessarily good measures of that. I have opinions on that as well that we can talk about shortly. But we need some sort of metric that attempts at least to be as objective as it can be to compare those students in those situations for the purposes of a university. Because what's going to happen, I say we need that. I think that we need that for efficiency's sake. I don't think it needs to be a single test, though. That's why I think that it's great that there's ACT and SAT. But they don't really compete because it's really, and this is a completely different tangent from this topic, but I think it's really bad that it's almost like some of these schools, these universities and colleges, and high schools even for that matter, are in cahoots with the organizations behind ACT and SAT, because it's like certain schools will mainly just take the SAT and they won't really take the ACT, and vice versa. Some do both, and I think that's better. But there's really only those two major tests, right? Why aren't there half a dozen or a dozen different ones? And why aren't they all, accepted? And why isn't it one of those things where a school wants you to have like 3 of these 12 standardized tests so that they can get a better picture of, where you're at on all that? And so it's almost like it's a deflection. It's like they kind of want to try to do this, but are they really trying to engage in that? So go ahead with what you're going to say.
I was just going to say you're right, and having more. I mean, it's like measuring twice, cutting once. So the carpenter, rule of thumb. The more you measure, the more certain you're going to be with the result. And if you get a variation, well, then then you measure again. And see, does that variation, is that reality, or was the original measure correct or absolute, or the appropriate one? The thing is, and you're right, it is a game to a certain extent, and that's the sad part. That these measures, these metrics and measurement tools, they all tend to fall into that. And create industries around it. That's probably why there's not more competition, so to speak, for those two tests. Right? There are preparation courses that I've known of students that spent parents actually spent a significant amount of money in helping the students prepare to take the SAT or the ACT to get a better score, right? Because the scores are the things that a 1 point difference in the score. In fact, I'll give you a story to that effect. When I was a senior in high school, long time ago, I visited uh, one very nice private university near here, near where I live. Well known. If I were to say it, you would know it. It's well known around the country as well. Pretty small, a couple of thousand students. The assistant director of admissions, when I went down there to visit him for the visit and the tour, campus tour, he asked me had I taken my ACT, and I said I had, and I told him. He said, "What was your score?" And I told him my score. He said, "Would you be willing to take it again? If you could raise your score up 2 points, I could give you a full 4-year scholarship." And he said, but at the score that I had, he says the competition is so tough, I couldn't even guarantee that you'd get accepted. And
That's
I mean,
wild.
it is, and it's not like if he says, oh, you increased your score by 20%. I mean, the difference was probably a 5% difference in score from going from at the time probably a $50,000 to $60,000 scholarship for 4 years. Tells you how long ago that's been in a private school. To the point of not even getting in, and so those kinds of scenarios, and that's been a year or two ago, since that occurred, and so it happens even more now, where those things are indicators. A person makes one score and they make 2% higher, then it sets them in a whole different category of appeal to the universities, because the universities want the better students, right? I mean, they're biased in that way, right? Because they can use that as marketing material for the next wave of students that they want to bring in. They want to attract the best and the brightest in all that they do. So
Well, I have an opinion about that. I think it's more along the lines that the brighter students are more likely to graduate and are more likely to fall into the alumni association. But that's that's an opinion.
But I mean, to the point about this particular point about this, there is a need of sorts, and the University of California, the head of that university is Janet Napolitano, and she the article that I was reading recently said that she had been they've been studying this for 2 years about removing the standardized testing, and I think, like a lot of other scenarios, the coronavirus pandemic sort of gave leverage to a lot of different decision makers to either make a big decision, big bold decision, or to accelerate a big bold decision. And I feel like that's what's happened here, because it's a perfect storm for the meeting multiple needs. But the point I was going to make there is that they were going to try this for a few years, for 4 years. That was why it was 2024. And then at that particular point in time, if they had not come up with a better one, they were going to remove the need for standardized testing for admission as an admissions criteria. They would still use them, but they would not be required for admission.
So that's kind of both of the next sections in one. But so before we jump into that, I want to talk about
for leaking on the topics.
No. That's quite all right. I mean, I want these conversations to be natural, and I think that they have been to this point. I think it's more beneficial and easier to follow when they are natural in that way. But before that, I do want to talk a little bit about the subject of manipulation, and kind of as an intro to that, let's talk a little bit about the efficacy of those particular tests, the ACT and SAT, as being that standard ruler that we're talking about. And then I think that can lead naturally into this whole idea of manipulation. So I will fully admit I never took the SAT. I took the pre-SAT, and I don't recall what I got on it. But I took the ACT several times because I just kept trying to want to get a better score. It's mainly just me and my ego sort of thing, more than it was I needed to get a better score, because even the first time I got a score that would have been plenty acceptable for anything I wanted to do. I just kind of have this mode of competition with myself usually. And so I will say, particularly for the ACT, it is a poor indicator of pretty much anything other than some basic grammar rules, some extremely basic reading comprehension, some basic math and algebra, and that's about it. which is useful, right? I think having reading comprehension is useful. I think the reading portion of the test needs to be more difficult for it to be really super helpful for higher echelon schools. I think where it can be helpful for is like mid tier and low mid tier schools. When I say that, I don't mean that from academic rigor. I don't mean that from public reputation or anything like that. I just mean particularly academic rigor, which is not always does not always coincide with popularity or reputation in the general public. Anyway, so I think that so it's good for low mid tier, but for high tier, which let me be clear, I don't think that the University of California is high tier in academic rigor. I think they're probably mid tier, higher end of low mid tier to high mid tier. That's pure opinion. I'm just spitting out opinion right now on that though. And I mean that's almost irrelevant. Is irrelevant to the conversation at hand, I think. Anyway, the science portion is useless. It's absolute garbage, trash, useless. It is a reading comprehension part 2, but the reading comprehension is skewed in a way that makes it unclear what you're trying to comprehend when you read it. And again, I took this test years and years ago at this point myself as well, but I just have such clear memory of how irrelevant the science section was to anything that you learn in any science class. To me, having been in science, I've done hard science. I have a degree in mathematics. My minor was in physics. I took chemistry, in college. So I, did labs, all that kind of stuff. I took several upper level physics courses, mechanics, electrodynamics, all that kind of stuff, theoretical physics. I took all these courses and I did okay. I didn't do great, but I didn't better than a C. How's that? For the most part. And so I know science to some degree, right? Let's just say at a basic level, I know science, and that the science portion is completely irrelevant to science. So it is set up like another reading comprehension part, but it is not even useful, I don't think. So generally, I'll say the test is kind of useful for the ACT.
So they become somewhat of a just a gate rather than a ruler. They're a gate.
Yes, right. So, and this will come back in the next section, or one of the later sections, is there may be some points on the whole getting rid of standardized testing argument, but I'll leave that for that. So let's talk about manipulation, unless you had something else you want to talk about the standard level of it. All right, so for manipulation, I know secondhand, I won't say firsthand because I didn't watch it happen, but I know secondhand a very famous individual that some people listening to this may know through football, professional football player. I know for a fact that he cheated on his ACT, and I know the individual. I know very well the individual who helped him do it, and I fully believe that this happened. I know, like I said, this is secondhand knowledge. The guy who did it didn't tell me, but another guy who's even a closer friend of this guy told me, and I fully believe it. And I'm not going to name any names about this, but so I know that happens. Even aside from that situation, we have to know that just happens.
So I don't have to go get Roger Goodell to go find out about this NFL player.
No. I don't. The thing is, I don't care either, because at some level, this needs to be another podcast. The NCAA and college level sports and it's irrelevance to academics. Yeah,
professional amateurs.
Right, exactly. Look, let's just do that. Who cares? Why does it have to be college? Let's just have that. Anyway, that's another podcast topic. I feel much more passionately about that one than I surprise myself whenever I think about that topic, because it's like, anyhow. So we know this kind of stuff happens, right? And then you have like the whole thing where like manipulation, not just of like standardized testing like that. Wait, and then the other thing too is the proctors are in on it as well. They just look the other way, and because I know who the proctor was for that exam as well, and I fully believe that he just didn't see it happen. You know what I mean?
Well, we know there's a very public case that you and I both know about where that occurred. An NBA All-Star.
Oh yeah.
Derrick Rose, right?
Sure.
and the University of Memphis had to vacate 3 years of 30+ wins. They came in runner-up in the NCAA tournament in 2008, and that was all vacated because of a fraudulent ACT where
Right.
someone took the test for Derrick Rose.
Again, it's not unique. It happens everywhere. So,
Yeah, some cases, we know one's been publicly validated, right?
right.
And proven, and then the one that you said was secondhand. So with those two as anecdotes, there have to be others out there, especially
Right.
with the number.
And those are sports related. Both of those are sports related. And if it's sports related, what's going to stop it from being academics related, right? Somebody just really wants to get into a particular school and just can't cut the mustard on that standardized test.
Yeah, it's not the same thing exactly, but the Lori Loughlin and Felicity
Right.
Huffman scandal, where they were bribing the universities for their daughters to get in, paying hundreds of thousands of dollars, for that benefit, and so there are other people with means that are doing things like that aren't related to sports, that are in the academic world, or that it's really kind of being generous to call that doing that in the academic.
That was
world.
just trying to buy prestige.
Right, in the social, right, I was going to say in the social status world is what that is. Trying to buy, a access to a degree, and obviously once they got there, then they had taught their children, they had taught their young adult children how to get the degree, right, by any means possible.
Sure.
Through whatever kinds of I mean, they may not have done that, but I mean, it speaks to the temptations and the manipulation, as you say, that it doesn't stop with that one thing. It's
right.
Just
oh yeah.
The tip of the iceberg, or it is the iceberg. I don't know which, but it's still, a good friend of mine once said, "You don't have 83% integrity."
Right. That's right.
You either do or you don't.
Yeah.
So it's hard to say, well, I just did it just this one time. Well, okay, then that means you're not, your integrity is certainly in question from that point on.
And that plays into the last point or the last section I want to talk about. But before we get to that section, let's talk about the changes for the coronavirus situation. Sure. and what may be appropriate for that, or what we, and again, this is just our opinion, what we think is appropriate, right? Because this is the things we gotta say.
Right, and it makes sense based on the circumstances that we're all trying to deal with the best way we can.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah, and so I think that it is utterly reasonable for colleges and universities to find themselves in this sort of environment because of this situation where students have not had access to be able to take these tests, to take reasonable measures to not let that be a stumbling block to students getting in, right?
Sure.
But they have to be fair about it, right? That's the trick. They have to consider the students who worked really hard, and for example, let's say a junior takes or a sophomore for that matter takes like the ACT, does well enough to get into this university they want to go to, and then that's 2019. 2020 hits, and all of those seniors or whoever can't take it, and are they going to get in over this person who was diligent and able-bodied before, able-skilled or whatever beforehand, and made that cut? I mean, comparing somebody who took it and met the previous standard versus where we are now, where someone can't even prove it, it's almost like you need to have like a hierarchy of consideration, right? If you've got this, if I've had this standard before and you can prove that to me now, then you are a better candidate, unfortunately de facto, than somebody who couldn't provide that, because meaning that you waited as late as you could to take it, or as late as you could to get the score that you wanted to, which let's be clear, you could take these things several times a year. I know this personal experience. So but I understand that there's costs involved and there's time involved in getting to and fro. I understand that that's not free, right? It's not just fall in your lap sort of thing. Right. But point being is that I think that it makes total sense to consider maybe more strongly GPA. So if like a student has a 4.0, of course, forgetting or moving beyond this point of some schools can do beyond 4.0, which I think is ridiculous. If they have, a very good GPA, they've demonstrated they have a lot of involvement outside of the classroom in either academics or extracurricular stuff or whatever, and it's clear that, hey, look, they are really trying to move their academic career forward. Okay, sure, I think that's fine to consider them some of that stuff a little more heavily in lieu of having one of these standardized tests for a finite period of time. If you don't take a hard line on some of these things, then you are threatening, 1, your credibility, 2, your integrity, and 3, just the quality of what kind of institution you are. And people want to say that that's wrong to try to protect that integrity or protect that quality of institution, but it's like, is it really? So you're saying you're not okay with MIT turning down students? So MIT should accept everybody? So you're saying you're not okay with your University of California turning down students? University of California should accept everybody? You're not okay with University of Alabama Birmingham not turning down? So you see what I'm saying? It's like you if you start making that argument, then you have to say everybody just gets in as long as you can pay. Well, then you make the argument, why should you have to pay? You just keep making these arguments. It doesn't. What you're doing is you're destroying all of these systems and institutions that we've built up. And to what end? That's the real question. It's like a student who can't get into MIT. I was one of those. Can get into lots of other institutions. Mm-hmm. A student who can't get into University of Chicago. Apparently, I was one of those. Can get into a lot of other institutions. Luckily, I think I got accepted everywhere else I applied. But the reality of it is that even outside of my situation, if you can't get into University of Memphis or University of Texas at Austin or any of these schools, there's always some other school that you can apply to that you can get into and succeed in, very likely, if you really want to succeed. And the short of it is, everybody thinks that the most important thing is the name of the institution at the top of your diploma when you graduate. And while that means something, don't get me wrong, it definitely means something, because that's why we try to protect the integrity of these institutions and the quality of these institutions. It means something. But at the end of the day, why are you trying to go to these places? Like, why do you want to go to University of California? Why do you want to go to, Tulsa University? Why do you want to go to Indiana University, University of Illinois, any of these places, West Virginia University? Because for me, I'll talk about me, because I think that maybe I'm typical. Maybe I'm not typical. I don't know. The places that I was interested in even applying to were because, 1, I'd seen them play basketball, and hey, I really like college basketball, and it would be cool to go to that university, which was only maybe like 3 of the places that I applied to, or it was I kind of have an idea of the sort of programs I want to go into, and I know that these schools are good for those kinds of programs, and so I apply to those. But the reality of it is, you can look at the list of rankings of schools. If you're that concerned about it, you could find schools for whatever program. That it doesn't have to be the top echelon. It doesn't have to be the second top echelon. What's interesting about this is you can find schools that, if you're a good enough student, or at least if you desire enough to learn something, you can find a school where you can go and you'll get individualized attention, because you'll stand out head and shoulders above the other students in that program. Or it'll be a school where that program's so small that everybody will know everybody. And this is how the physics department was at the school that I went to, is that everybody will know everybody, and all the professors will know you. And so then it's so easy to just talk to somebody, ask questions when you need help, and you create this peer group and this friend group, and it's really easy to assimilate into college or university life if that's where you're trying to go. And it's like, you are a nobody when you're at these like super high-end elite places, unless you came in knowing some of these people already, or some of these faculty and staff. So the whole conception about universities needs to change, and even more beyond that, it needs to change to be, I think, even more skeptical of what value those institutions are providing at this point in history.
Well, I think you laid the cornerstone for the whole manipulation, the motive for the manipulation of these standardized tests. It's because you went through this rationale of the top university that people want to strive to get into, but there are others that are sufficiently appropriate for the person's life goals, right?
And maybe even more than sufficient, right? Most people just don't know.
But it ends up being more of a social status.
Sure.
And your point about the name of the university on the degree on the piece of paper isn't the most important thing. It's the name of the individual, in my estimation, right? Because that is the degree is not awarded to the university; it's awarded to you, to the graduate, because it signifies the accomplishment. And the test, the standardized testing, tests that are used for admission decisions, they don't end up with anything except for a door, right? They open a door potentially, or close the door, as the case may be.
Yeah.
But really, what matters is what happens when you go through that door.
Well, so I'll extend your point even further. To me, the diploma means nothing. Like, I'm glad that I have it, right? And I'm glad that I have it as a credential to rest on. But really, the only thing that means something to me are the things that I learned. And that wasn't from every class. There were many classes I took that I learned zero. Some classes I felt dumber coming out of than actually being in. American government being one of those classes, because I have severe disagreements with the professor who taught that class, severe, and he wouldn't hear it. Anyway, we can talk about that another time. But the classes that I did, particularly, I would say all of my math classes, all of my physics classes, and then I took computer science classes that I felt like I got a lot out of. I took some philosophy classes I felt like I got a whole lot out of. Economics classes, I love economics. I got a ton out of the economics courses that I took. And so it's like, I felt like all of that made it worthwhile, in addition to the people that I met, the relationships I forged. I mean, not the least of which is my wife, right? But even beyond that, my best friend that I'm in a band with and we do music all the time, I met him because of college. Kind of indirectly, but I mean, it was a bonding thing after we did meet, and in a whole, I would say 2 or 3 different groups of friends that I have now because of that, and a network of people that if I had a question, like a real technical question about something, I could go and ask somebody something that, like, one of my friends is a PhD. And I think he got a professorship up in Alberta, and we're in the physics department together. And so it's like all of this stuff where it's like I have this pretty wide network, which is interesting, that I never would have had I not gone to college. And even if I didn't graduate, I would have still had that network, and that would have been valuable in and of itself.
So this really isn't a relevant point to the standardized testing and all, and the manipulation of it, but it is an insight that just occurs to me based on what you just got through saying. We mentioned that the standardized test is just the opportunity to go into the door, the entree through the door, or into the door. And what you just went through was looking back toward the door, from the journey through the door and through the university and through that process. The students today, or the prospective students, they don't understand that. All they see is that binary, social status flag, and versus the real value of the education, whether it be a university education or some sort of other post-secondary education that is life preparation. That's really what you're talking about.
Sure.
And in all of its facets, not just professionally, not just academic, not just intellectually, but maturity wise, growth as an individual, expansion of your close concentric circle of friends, things like that. That are the outcomes and the parts of the journey of life that make it all worth the trip.
Yeah.
So to speak.
The next point of this, and we didn't talk. So I point being, and we kind of got off the rails there a bit. But point being on this section about kind of dropping the requirement in the short term for this coronavirus situation, I think it makes total sense as long as universities are very careful about how they do it, and they're very controlled about how they do it. The thing is, I think that this whole University of California situation, they use this. Crisis. I don't really like that word usually, but this situation as an opportunistic point to kind of shoehorn in this thing that they were wanting to try. I think the problem with this is twofold. One, I think that if you are what's the reasoning behind trying to drop this? And I think that their reasoning is the research that they cite or whatever is the whole thing about, it is unfair to socio and economically disadvantaged individuals because, one, it costs to take the test. Two, you have to be able to get to the test. Three, the school systems that they come from, they may not be as well prepared for that kind of a test. And there's a laundry list of things, and I understand that, and I know that that's a reality. And the I'm going to make a controversial statement here that really it just upsets me, Doyle. And that statement is that I think a lot of people, when they say socio and economically disadvantaged, they immediately think minority, African American, Hispanic, etc. And both you and I know many socioeconomically disadvantaged people that are, Caucasian, Asian, all different kinds of races. So it's not race based at all. So I think that I would applaud them using that terminology of socioeconomically disadvantaged. And so that being the case, I want to further say, so that's the controversial part. But I want to preface what I'm about to say with that, because that I believe that this is a statement that people need to consider. Just because someone has been socioeconomically disadvantaged to that point in their life does not mean that institutions that are trying to hold a certain level of quality should drop that metric just to be able to bring people of that status in. Because there's plenty of institutions that would be a great match for those individuals. And that's kind of why I prefaced it with all those other things I was talking about with my experience. Because I did not go to an upper echelon school, or even really second tier echelon school, I wouldn't say. I would say that it was... if you're comparing it to University of California, maybe a little bit below University of California. I guess it depends on what you're studying, though. That's actually true, because the school I went to does have some pretty well-reputed programs. Anyway, point being that what you're doing is, when you open doors like that for students who aren't ready, when you remove those types of standard doors and gates, what you're doing is you're setting students up for failure. Some students it'll be fine, right? Because the reason they weren't able to get the right ACT score or whatever is because they weren't able to take it a second time, right? They could take it that one time, but they couldn't get it that second time. And if they take it that second time, they would have blown out of the water versus what they did the first time. Because that definitely happens. Absolutely, that happens. And so that those students may have, and so and the argument may be, well, we're skewing to those, right? Because we want to be able to grab those. I understand, but the reality is, I think that more often than not, it's just trying to lower the standard of the quality of the ability of the incoming students at that time. That doesn't mean anything about that person's character, those people's character, doesn't mean anything about it other than that's the reason that those standards exist in the first place. So my point being is that it's setting everybody up for failure. It's setting up that student to go to the university to fail because they're not at that caliber yet. They could totally be in the future, but they're not at that point, right? And it's setting up the university for failure because they're not going to be able to graduate that student. So that's a failure on the university. They couldn't educate that student. They said this student was ready and they didn't graduate. Whose failure is that? I mean, you can say, "Oh, it's just a student," because no, that's not the case. When you bring in a student that you have that is below your level of standard, that it is no longer fully on that student that they did not, graduate. So that's problematic. Not only that, it doubly damns the student because they flunk out there, and then it's unlikely they have opportunity to go somewhere else at that point because they may be saddled with too much debt, whatever. That's the case. And then also it's negative to the other university that the student would have succeeded in, where they would have been good in academics, they would have been good in the social life, and they would have been able to create these things. So you triply damn the student because they can't build like these social connections and all these things that you get in the college experience because they're too worried about trying to just pass and make the grade, where they're not ready to do that. And then this other university misses out on a great student who would have been a boon to their student body and a boon to their operations, and would have been able to graduate to them, been just to that whole ecosystem would have grown it. And so this whole thing is setting up a scenario where everybody loses and the student loses 3 times as much as everybody else. It's ridiculous, and nobody wants to talk about it that way. I don't understand.
Well, in the alternate outcome, is the university brings in these students, or allows these students in that don't meet the standard, and then the university then fails to uphold its own internal standard for fear of the public perspective of, oh, we made a mistake, and so
Right.
they basically socially promote, using a term from years ago, they socially promote that unequipped and unprepared student to graduate
And
in the
then
university.
that devalues it reduces the value of every degree that has that university's name on it,
Yes.
past and present and future.
So, if any school does this, and I think we agree that there are those that do, and if not most, if not all, um, if they do that, then they really don't have a standard, right?
Right, exactly. The thing that really upsets me about that is that when you go to school, when you go to like university or college, they really pound in your head about like the student code of conduct and honesty policies, where it's like don't cheat, you can't cheat, and it's not oh, you're just going to cheat yourself. It's like, no, they're much more harsh than that. If you cheat and you get your degree based on cheating, then you have devalued the degree of all of these other people. And it's like, yes, that's true, absolutely. And you're doing it as well, administration, by allowing these other students who aren't prepared for it or aren't a good match for the university in. It's like, it's so duplicitous. It's really weird. And here's the thing, and this is where I'm going to ascribe some intent that may not be there, but again, this is me injecting my opinion. They do this, then they have way more students that can come in. Those students can saddle themselves with massive amounts of debt in loans that are not forgivable. And I'm not some Bernie Sanders supporters like free college for everybody. I'm definitely not like that kind of person. But one thing is, I think that unforgivable loans is unforgivable. That's really ridiculous. I mean, no other kind of loan other than a student loan is unforgivable. And I'm not saying that we need to make them forgivable. I'm saying we need to fix a whole lot of crap around all that. But that's a completely different discussion. But my point is that these students will get in. University of California is not a cheap place to go, even if you're from California, right? And so they're going to saddle themselves with all of this debt, maybe go a semester 2, maybe 3, flunk out, and then they'll have that much debt on them for literally no gain, and they've wasted a year and a half, maybe 2 years of their life on this. How is this not just a recipe for absolute catastrophe? Like, I don't see where...
It is. I mean, and that's to your point about the Bernie Sanders. That's why the left, they continue to make that, because in the defense of this position, they see the unfairness of what has transpired there.
Sure.
But that said, again, that's another discussion for another topic. But that totally ignores the individual culpability and the individual accountability. We're not talking about that specifically. I'm just making that call out.
Yeah.
But that's your point. But then why? Why do the universities do this? And you and I both know why the reason. They're academic businesses.
Oh, sure. Oh, I think it's twofold. I think that's one of the two to feet that it stands on. Because it's just more money for them to rake in, right? Because they don't care if these students can repay those loans or not at all. Well,
Right.
they may give lip service to the fact that to say that they care, but they don't care, right? If they did, then they would be thinking about things a little more holistically than what they are. They're being very myopic with this. I think the other leg of that is that, and this is the extra controversial statement I'm going to make tonight, is that universities are becoming a battleground for people's minds, and that
Yes.
battleground is being taken over by people who have some really scary ideas, and those scary ideas are being promulgated by so much of the organization, and it is getting to the point where part of those ideas are that no other ideas other than that can exist, and that's really the basis of it. It has to beat all other ideas, physically beat all other ideas that I say physically, effectively beat all other ideas out of existence, and that's how it's going to dominate the landscape. That's literally the philosophy, and that's taking hold, and it's taking hold in ways that are it is not just stifling, but it is muting discourse and dissenting opinion, and muting any kind of vibrant discussion about these ideas, and are taking de facto that this is reality, and that's how things are going to be. And at that point, university has ceased to be the academy. It is no longer a university, it's no longer a college. It is an indoctrination center. And so all of these places are becoming indoctrination centers, and that is I was going to say the word sick, but it's stronger than that. It is a cancerous growth beginning in these organizations and in these sorts of things. And we have got to be vigilant about how we fix this,
Right.
because if we don't fix it, it's going to fix everything by destroying everything, and it's really bad. And it sounds alarmist, but I'm telling you, Doyle, I just I feel very certain about this. And I'm trying to figure out what I personally can do to help make things better than what they are.
And that's part of why we have these conversations, right? That not that they're a panacea, or not that they're a magic pill, but maybe they are thought provoking, to foster more discussions and more appropriate debate on some of the topics, and if nothing else, just the sharing of information, because that's what I think is so sad right now, is that so many people are so uninformed, and don't even see the need to be informed.
They've been lulled into this position though from birth, and that's part of the problem too. Is that it's an intertwined machinery that works together without acknowledgement of each other, and that's what's really insidious about this, is that it is people want to use this term, it's an agenda, and I don't like using that term at all, because one, it's already become a real kind of a weasel word in a lot of people's minds, and I think agenda is a technically okay term for what they're trying to talk about, but I think it's not loaded, but it has too much baggage right now. But there are reasons why certain organizations are doing certain things and are saying certain things in certain ways, and underlying it all is a huge level of manipulation that people just don't understand that they're being subjected to day in and day out, just about everywhere that they look. And that is unfortunately setting up a scenario that if we don't figure out how to break out of it and how to move on to something better, that it's all going to just end in flames. And I think that there is progress in the way of people understanding about this being the nature of reality, and trying to do things to combat it and to speak out against it, and so I have hope in some things that I see, but this is part of the deal with me in this podcast too, is I can just no longer be silent about all these things. I've just seen it for so long, and this pattern just continues to reemerge everywhere, and it's just so crystal clear to me now that if I continue to remain silent, then I'm complicit, and I cannot be complicit.
Sure. I absolutely 100% agree with that. And that's, sort of goes to how we've titled this podcast, Things I Gotta Say, where it's bursting out. It must find its way out in whatever form, constructive form that we can find. And that's what we're trying to do.
And this will be the last thing that I say about this, and that's what's kind of, I guess, frustrating to me too, in all of this, is that I see a lot of people that I believe have a pretty good understanding about what's going on, and the fire in their heart about this rages as much as it does in mine, and it just kind of overtakes them, and they kind of fall into the emotional side of things, and and then so they're just kind of like screaming about it. And I totally understand that impetus, right, and that drive to just want to tear your hair out and tear your clothes off and wear sackcloth sort of thing, right? I totally understand that, but that's just not constructive, because then people who see that can point that out and see everybody who thinks that way is just crazy,
right? Right.
And it's
credibility is harmed and not in a good way. Right.
Right.
Yeah.
All right, Doyle. I think we should probably call it about there. What do you think?
Okay. I think we have flogged this pretty good for the night. It still has a lot of points to be made, and as we see how this unfolds over the coming months, it's going to be interesting to see the class of the freshman class of 2020 as they go into school, how that's going to be, and especially looking forward to 2021. And hopefully this will be a positive thing. Maybe some really good outcomes will come from this, rather than the fear that it will just degrade into something worse than what's there right now. So,
yep,
indeed.
All right. Well, as always, I appreciate you taking the time here, Doyle, and it was a pleasure to talk with you.
Same here. Same to you, and enjoy the rest of your evening.
All right. We'll see you next time. Bye.
Bye now.